Here's our top tips on buying used four-wheel drives. When buying used, you're mainly checking a vehicle for two things: the history of the vehicle, making sure it hasn't been thrashed, been in an accident, or had any major repairs. And secondly, understanding the current health of the vehicle, what needs to be fixed on it right now when you buy it. What this means is you're not going to be out for any expensive repairs in the near future. Today we're down in the Grays auction yard in Brisbane, looking at their fleet of second-hand four-wheel drives up for auction. In this video, we're going to show you a heap of tips and techniques that you can do to tell the health of a used four-wheel drive without even taking it for a drive. Rightio, next up we're going to go over some of the more important things. These are the bigger ticket, more expensive items. What these could do is make or break whether you purchase the vehicle. First up, we're going to do some basic checks on the engine. What we're trying to tell for here is whether the engine's looked after and it's in a healthy state, or it's worn out and it's looking a bit tired. One of the best ways to check the health of the engine is to see if it's putting out any smoke when the engine is running. Start the engine and check for any excessive smoke. Black smoke coming out the exhaust is the most common smoke emitted from diesel engines. It's the result of a poor air-fuel ratio and has many different causes that range from things like a clogged air filter, to faulty injectors, or even a damaged turbo. White smoke is the result of raw, unburnt diesel making its way through the exhaust. This usually points to only one thing: failing injectors. This could result in you needing to replace one or multiple injectors, which could end up being a very costly undertaking. Blue smoke is the rarest of smoke to find out the exhaust, and it's a result of burning oil. This is a bit more of a serious concern, and it could mean the engine is showing signs of worn piston rings or seals and might need some serious work done to it. Ultimately, no excessive exhaust smoke is good, so make sure you take a serious look at it before buying the vehicle. Two areas that are going to be actually quite hard to check on a used vehicle is the turbo and the injectors. Now, not every four-wheel drive is going to have a turbo, but if it does, the turbo is a very critical component. They're usually located on the side of the engine, but locations can vary from car to car. Apart from looking down here and seeing if there's any excess oil or anything around the piping and turbo itself, if you're not taking all the pipes off and checking for shaft play, it's not a great deal you can do. Start the vehicle up, see if there's much blue smoke on idle, get the vehicle warm and give it a few revs. If you can hear any loud, high-pitched squealing coming from the turbo, then it's probably a little bit worn out and sad. If these problems are found, the turbo could need a bit of work done to it, or at worst, replacing entirely, which could be quite expensive and definitely something you need to factor into your buying decision. Much like the turbo, the injectors are critical components of all engines. These are generally located under engine covers and sometimes even EGR components, so they can be hard to diagnose when you can't take anything apart. What you can do is start the vehicle and check for excessive white smoke, more unburnt diesel, check if there's any knocking when the vehicle's warm. Another couple of good signs is if the vehicle takes a while to crank over, or if once it's shut off it takes a little bit to shut down, could be signs of a dribbly injector. Now, if after these checks you are concerned about the injectors, it isn't the end of the world. Doesn't mean you can't buy the car. It's just something you got to factor into your budget, because for some vehicles they can be quite expensive. But once you replace them, you've got to remember that this vehicle is going to be good for many more kilometers to come. The viscous hub and fan cools the engine as the four-wheel drive runs. It's right at the front of the engine running off the water pump. This is another critical part of your four-wheel drive. Although, unlike the last two components, it's much easier to have a look at. Basically what you want to do is grab it and spin it, and if it stops straight away, that means it's locking up and doing its job. Once the vehicle is warm, check it again and it should be even stiffer. Now, you can also give it a wobble here and check if there's any movement in the viscous hub or the water pump. If there's no movement, the cooling system is in top-notch condition and ready to go. Viscous hubs and fans are usually pretty cheap, so if it does need replacing, it shouldn't add too much to the budget list. But do keep in mind that if you're finding many little problems like this, it can indicate that the four-wheel drive has not been well looked after and could have many more severe problems that not even the seller is aware of. Another easy test you can do to the engine is a blow-by. What I mean here is get the car started, take the oil cap off and sit it on top. And if it sits there dancing around and doesn't get blown off, that is a good sign the engine is healthy. Now, if it gets bounced around and blown off, almost looks like steam or even excessive oil is shooting at the top, this can be a sign of worn piston rings and bores, and this is not good. It means a very tired, worn out engine. This could be a really big sign that something major is wrong with the engine. And if worse comes to worse, a full engine rebuild could seriously blow out your budget. But you got to be careful because you can't do this test on every single engine. For example, the early model DI-ZD30s and GU Patrols, you can't do this test because of where the timing chain runs. Take the oil cap off while the vehicle's running and oil will spurt out everywhere. Could give you a bum steer thinking that the vehicle is stuffed, but it's just you can't do the test on them. Also, some later model vehicles like 79s, even the M57 I've put in my GU, they're known for breathing heavy from the factory. So if you take the cap off, there's going to be a lot of blow-by. It's not a bad thing, it's just how the engines work. Oil leaks are a big concern for older four-wheel drives, especially after the engine has been worked hard. Oil has a tendency to leak through seals and gaskets as they can harden over time, especially if the four-wheel drive hasn't been looked after or maintained. Super simple this tip. All you got to do is check for obvious signs of leaks around the rocker cover, if it's a turbo, around the turbo feed, turbo return. Once you've checked up top for any obvious leaks, make sure you jump under the car and check the important things like the rear main or the front main seal. Oil leaks could mean old hardened seals or gaskets, or even excessive crankcase pressure. If you find them around the rocker cover, they aren't too bad. But the ones you really want to look out for are the ones that are hard to get to. Things like the front or rear main seal, leaks around the timing cover. These can mean very labour intensive repairs. This next one is a super quick check that can tell you a hell of a lot about the engine. What you're going to do is take the oil cap off and look on the inside for some white or milky oil. What that means is there's some contamination in there from the cooling system. This could mean a cracked head or blown head gasket. Now, if you don't know what you're doing, this could be a quite expensive fix, but if you do, this could be a great way to grab a bargain. Now, this one is a bit of a no-brainer. Check the engine oil. Now, don't be alarmed if the oil is black in a diesel. Anyone who's done a diesel engine oil service before knows it turns black pretty much straight away. But handy little test you can do. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Get some on your fingers, and if it's nice and slippery and when you try to pull your fingers apart it tries to stick together like this, well, that means the oil is doing its job, still lubricating the engine. But if it feels super watery and not very slippery and you try to pull your fingers apart and it's not sticking, it means the engine oil is definitely due for a change, and the engine could be a little bit tired. It's been running on that oil for a while. While a tired engine may be a concern, changing out oil is really not a great hassle, and it's something you can do easily at home. Next up, the airbox. Pull the air filter out and check it. This one's quite clean. But come over here and have a look down in here. The bottom of the airbox is quite dirty. That is totally fine, but the filter side here is also a bit dirty. Now, this isn't great, but buying a used vehicle with a factory airbox, it's probably going to happen whether you like it or not. So maybe one thing you got to add to your mods list is a new aftermarket airbox and probably a bit of an intake clean before you go anywhere wheeling. One concern that this may lead to is dust in the engine. This could cause excessive wear to the engine if it's too bad. A few checks on the cooling system can also tell you a lot about the vehicle. So pop the cap off while the vehicle's cold, check the colour of the coolant. Here it's nice and green, the overflow is nice and green also. You don't want contaminants in there or rust. Now it isn't the end of the world if it's a little bit rusty, you could just flush it out. But if you've got oil in the cooling system, you could have some bigger dramas. Now put the cap back on, start the vehicle up, and once it's warm, just check these hoses are holding pressure. If you're holding pressure, it means your cooling system is working perfect. If the hoses aren't holding pressure, however, this means the cooling system has a leak somewhere, which could end up being very costly if it's in the head or head gasket, not something simple like a hose or radiator cap. If you're looking at an older diesel like this one and it's a bit slow to start, this could be signs of the glow plugs not working, or it could be down on a bit of compression. On most older four-wheel drives, the glow plugs are easy to access and change. They're also affordable, so it isn't a great concern. However, an engine with low compression definitely is a concern, as you could be up for a total engine replacement. Now that's the main engine checks to do. It might seem like a lot, but the engine is probably one of the biggest parts of your car that you're going to buy, so you want to make sure it's pretty good. At this point with your budget list, you'll probably have a good idea on whether or not the four-wheel drive is for you, but there's still some other important components on the four-wheel drive to look at. Now, we're going to take a look at the transmission and transfer case. These two components can be hard to access as they're located under the four-wheel drive and mainly have internal problems that won't be easy to see. Luckily, there's some fairly simple checks you can perform to test the health of these components. What you want to do is start the vehicle up. Make sure it shifts into the gears nice with your foot on the clutch. Take your foot off the clutch, put it back on. Listen for squealing, no noisy throw-up bearings. Now, put it in gear and start to take your foot off the clutch, and it's grabbing nice and close to the floor, which means the clutch is nice and healthy. So, as long as everything is moving smoothly and the clutch is biting close to the floor, this is a good indicator that everything in your manual transmission and clutch is working well. In these modern autos, it's much the same concept. You just want to check they're all working fine. So put it in reverse, give it an accelerate, check there's no violent clunks in the gear, then put it into drive, load it up, drive forward. If there's any violent clunking, there's probably something wrong in the transmission. This one is nice and smooth. Also tap it over in the manual mode, see if you can tap up and down the gears like this one. It's working just fine. To assess the vehicle's transfer case, it's much like the last test. All you need to do is check that the vehicle can change between two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive smoothly. In older four-wheel drives, there's usually a shorter gear stick beside the main gear stick to change, while on newer four-wheel drives, they either have a dial or some buttons. Sometimes you've got to rock forward or back a little bit for it to work. It's in 4 high, then we're going to go to 4 low. Let's put it in drive, screw forward a little bit, and it's all working and engaging just fine. Gearboxes and transfer cases can be very costly things to replace, so make sure you check over them very well before buying the vehicle. A super critical thing in any vehicle is your brake system, and it's very important to look over it. As you can see here, this vehicle's got some pretty old rotors on it and the pads are worn quite down. Most dual carb utes have what's called a drum brake on the back. This is a perfect example, no leaks or anything. If there is a bit of a leak in the wheel cylinder, you'll find a bit of moisture down here, but if the pedal's nice and firm, that means you've got a good working brake system. Another part of the brake system you want to check is all the rubber lines and the hard lines. Check for leaks like this, there's no leaks here, and these rubber lines can actually perish or expand under load. So if you brought your mate or your missus along, get them to jump in there and pump the pedal, and you check these rubber lines, see if they're expanding or leaking. Brake system repairs aren't a massive concern in terms of budget. While they are an important component, they're simple to replace and not as expensive as things like a new motor or gearbox. Next up on the checklist is the chassis and driveline. Now, by doing a few simple checks on these two items, you can really tell how much off-road work the vehicle has actually done. What you want to do is jump under the vehicle and check all the low-lying points like the cross member, the back diff, the front bash plate, the bottom of the chassis. This is a pretty modern dual cab and it doesn't look like there's a mark under it at all. And one of the best parts about buying at Grays is the vehicles, nothing's covered up. They get a once-over check written in the description and it is what it is. So nothing's hidden as such, and this looks like a very good representation of a vehicle that's only done some light off-roading. The chassis is a very important part of the car to check, as it's probably the hardest part to get replaced if things turn out to be worse than you thought. The condition of the chassis could be a deal breaker in itself if it's in bad enough condition. Now, if you're looking at an older used four-wheel drive, no doubt it's been off-road, so there's going to be things you're going to pick up on like this one. There's a couple of dents in the cross member here. There's a little bit of surface rust in the exhaust here, nothing too bad. But if you find things like this and this, make sure you go over the underside of it with a fine-tooth comb. Bring a torch, stick your finger in the chassis, make sure there's no rust in hidden places and it's all nice and clean. Rust in the chassis is probably one of the biggest things to worry about. And we say that if there's a lot of structural rust or even rust holes, you should walk away unless you're looking at the best bargain of your life or a long-term project car. Some more driveline components you want to check under that are easy to do is the tail shaft here. So just grab it when the car's in gear with the handbrake on and give it a bit of a wobble here. As you can see, a bit of movement in the slip joint down here and up here. The uni has a little bit of movement too. Now, these aren't big drummers, they're all parts that can be replaced, but just make sure you write them on your list and add them to your budget. Another couple of important checks to do. One of them is steering linkages. So pretty much anywhere where the steering has got a ball joint on the end, whether it be solid axle or IFS, you just want to give it a wobble, see if there's movement in it. And if you've got a mate or there's someone else around the auction yard, get them to wobble the steering wheel and just see if there's any movement in these. Most of these are greasable, so you can pump them full of grease and they might take up. Also, suspension bushes. So these can be wear out. They're a consumable product. You just want to see how worn they are. What you can do is you can rock the vehicle, wiggle the tyre, and then have a look at the bush, see if it's moving. Or another little handy trick I do when I go and look at used cars, bring yourself a pry bar, stick it in there, wedge it against something, just put a bit of pressure on the bush and see how much it moves. As I said, they are a consumable part. It is just handy to know how worn out they are before you place a bid on the vehicle. We briefly talked about this earlier, but when buying used, you have to question whether the seller is telling the truth or not. And you really need to make a judgment call on whether the condition of the car matches what the seller is asking for it. There's a couple more checks that you can do to help this. One thing you want to check is the car's condition matches the odometer reading. So this car is very old. It's got 700,000 kilometers. It's got tears in the trims, tears in the seats, got a steering wheel cover. The pedals are really worn out. That is all just part of the parcel. It's an old car. But if you've got a new modern ute, let's say under 100,000 kilometers, and it's got all these features in it, well, it's probably had a very hard life, and maybe you should second guess your thoughts. Checking the vehicle's logbooks is also a good idea to give you history on the vehicle. Has it been serviced, even by the one mechanic? If it has, give them a call and ask them for the history on the vehicle. All these little checks will help you decide if the private seller is telling the truth or not. Make sure the condition of the four-wheel drive matches what the seller is saying, because if you don't, you might just end up with the lemon of a four-wheel drive. All those tips are going to be super handy for you guys if you're looking at buying a used four-wheel drive. Now, some of you might want to know what Grays is. It's a massive online marketplace. They sell everything from wine, excavators, but today we're really concentrating on the used four-wheel drive market. And I've got my mate Frank here. What's some things that are commonly missed that you reckon people should look out for when they come and look at these cars or are buying at auction?
Yeah, so my biggest tip with four-wheel drives is making sure you check over it for corrosion and rust.
Yeah, that's real common, isn't it?
Yeah, so a lot of these cars do come from the mines as well. So yeah, they do put in their hard work.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Just big tip is check over the car.
Check over the car, check underneath, bring a torch.
Yeah.
Stick your finger in the chassis, check if there's any mud or dirt or sand in there, and
that's it.
Go from there. Yeah, sweet.
Yeah. When the cars get dropped off here, they start off by getting looked at by our vehicle inspectors who do a visual look over of the car.
Yep.
We note down obvious damages like dents and scratches.
Yep.
We start the car to make sure it actually turns on.
Yep.
We look for engine lights to make sure, there's nothing on there as well. And we have a look over the engine bay as well to make sure there's no obvious leaks there too.
Now, something to note about this check that Frank just spoke about, it isn't actually a mechanical check over. That's why they encourage you to come down and check all about these things we just spoke about today. But if the car's in a different state that you just can't get down and you're not confident enough, you can also send a registered mechanic down to check the vehicle out for you. And you can get all this done before you decide to buy the vehicle or place your bid.
Once the cars have been inspected, we bring it into the photo booth here. We start off with our interior shots, so making sure we get every angle of the car inside.
Yep.
Then we do outside, so all four corners, and we try and take photos of any damage that we can. And then once the four corners are done, we do a 360, so the booth actually spins around.
Oh, that's cool. Very cool.
And so once the car goes up online, you can scroll through and have a look.
Pretty much feels like you're here.
That's it.
Awesome.
So we've got a wide range of four-wheel drives here as well. Cars that, are ready to turnkey, ready to go. Others project cars where you're going to need to put a little bit of elbow grease to get back onto the road. It just pays to do your research on what car you're looking to bid at.
Yeah, definitely.
And know what you're getting into before you place your bid.
Yeah, beautiful. And that's the beauty of being coming able to look and work out what you want in your vehicle.
Yeah, that's it.
Thanks to all those tips, Frank, and showing us around. It was super cool to see the massive range of cars and the process they go to get out here in the yard.
Yeah, no problem. So we've got a site like this across Australia. So all you have to do is jump online, have a look what we've got available and see what location it's in.
That's awesome, mate. You can nearly say you guys got a car for anyone.
Yeah, so all you have to do is just check out grays.com and see what we got.
I hope this video has helped any of you guys and girls out there looking at buying a used vehicles. Hopefully a couple of these little tips might even save you a bit of money in the long run. Now, I've learned a thing or two today. If you guys want to tell me a thing or two, throw in the comments below some of the tips you do, some of the things you look at when you're going to buy a used vehicle. And we might even do some more vehicle-specific buying used videos. So if you've got a car you want us to look at and maybe work out some pointers for, throw in the comments below. We'll have a read. Anyway, that's it for me now. I've got plenty more cars to go and look at. I'll see you next time on Full Drive 24/7.